There's a film I like. I've liked it for a very long time. It was Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Saw it ages ago, over 20 years ago. And story of two feckless high school students who travel through time. If that's a spoiler for you, I do apologise. And they discover on their travel through time in the first and the second one is then the second movie. They're supposed to save the entire universe and the world with a song that they've written and played, and the universe is brought into harmony and balance because of that piece of music. Coming out this week. In fact, this is Friday, and I'm going to see it later on today, so I can't tell you whether it's any good or how the plot ends or whether they do bring the universe into harmony and balance. But sometimes it feels like you don't get a choice. You have a destiny and you are going to fulfill it. And sometimes when you read the Bible, it does feel like that as well. There's a destiny and you've only got a choice to fulfill it. And this reading in Philippians is just phenomenal. I read from the English Standard Version as well. Now, if it appears as I look off camera, it's because I am, because the piece of paper I've got is over there. And I hold it just out of shot. If I hold it behind, I look like I'm looking. I can't tell if I'm looking at you or not, but that doesn't matter, does it? So Paul, writing to the Philippians, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. What is that about? See, some of what we have in our reading to Philippians, we need to remember what has happened previously. No, there's a previous letter to the Philippians. There's a previous encounter with the Philippians, the church of Philippi. You know, the Philippian jailer and the stories around that, and the beating and preaching and dissent, and this is not a proper thing for Romans to be involved with. Go look it up. Acts chapter 16, I think. Have a read. So Paul knows that to live is Christ. It is a good thing. It is a good thing to live, be known and seen as somebody who is a follower of Christ. And to die is better, because he gets to be with Christ. It's just brilliant, and that's what he wants to be. Same as Peter, when Peter is in the boat, in the storm, and Jesus is on the water, and he says, if it's you, Lord, come. Tell me to come. And Jesus says, come. And Peter gets out the boat. The greatest desire is to be where Christ is. That's what is desired. And if he's to live in the flesh, there's a bigger idea that's labelled under flesh. It's not just the meat and bones of a body and flesh of that. It's there's a desires there, there's passion there, there's want and will there. And if I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labour to me. I will be useful to my God. I will labour and work so that people will know that Christ lives. And then Paul says, which shall I choose? I cannot tell. I am hard pressed between the desire to live and the desire to die. But there's one thing that Paul is big on. Service. Serving. I may be caught between two hard pressed desires. I want to be where Christ is, but I will stay here now in this moment so that you, the church in Philippi, will be convinced that the fruitfulness and the joy in faith is what matters. That's it. To be fruitful, to produce what Christ needs in a community, in an individual, in a place. And Paul is the mechanism that is chosen to do that by his continued breathing. Isn't that fun? By mine and your continued breathing, we produce the fruit of community, of godliness, of patience, of love, joy, hope, peace, kindness, grace, mercy in other people. That's what we produce by continuing. And Paul is saying, and I'm coming to see you again. And I know that's what I will encounter. So let your life be worthy of the gospel of Christ. It doesn't say of life be worthy. Manner of life is what the ESV. How you and I live communicates the truth and delight of who Christ is, the good news of him. I'm a forgiven sinner. I'm forgiven. I am called and reconciled to him. Whether it's just phenomenal. You are called and reconciled to God, and because of who God is, you are reconciling the world, forging and building new communities. And it's always a choice. Always. You can be cranky and crotchety and bitter and angry and miserable. You're allowed to be. You can be a bitter, angry, miserable Christian, and people will look at you and go, oh, look, Christians are bitter, miserable, angry people. And that's the good news you provide. We are asked to be of one mind, striving side by side, standing firm in one spirit for the faith of the gospel. I believe Jesus rescued me. I believe Jesus rescued me. And my responsibility is the same as yours, to live in such a way that people recognize that I've been rescued. Rescued from something and rescued to something. It's a two-way, it has to be both of those. You're rescued from something and you're rescued to something. I'm rescued from sin and death and all that. And yes, I know I'm going to grow old and die. That's what I'm hoping for. But I am rescued to Christ. And then it says, not frightened in anything by your opponents. Tell you a story. I don't like telling stories about me, but I'm going to tell you a story about me. Back in the 90s, I went and took some of my youth group on a coach trip at the back end of the conflict in Bosnia and all around there, what used to be Yugoslavia. And we were taking a goodwill tour. We played troops for concerts, and we played concerts for troops in army camps, and we also played them in local hotels and places like that. I don't really remember what my role was. I just lifted and carried heavy things and people did stuff. That's generally I roaded for the band. And I took some of my youth group with me, and also on occasions did some balloon modelling. On one occasion I was doing balloon modelling for a bunch of kids, must have been 9-10 years old. They weren't very big, and apparently a friend of mine, Shane, told this story to my wife, that in the midst of doing balloon modelling, one of the kids decided he'd lift his shirt and show me the pistol that he had tucked into the waistband of his trousers. He's 9. And apparently my calm response was, well, you're still only having one, and I gave him only one balloon animal. And when it says not frightened in anything by your opponents, that's what Paul's talking about. He's talking about the moment where the confrontation, and it should be confrontation between Christians and followers of Christ, that the demand is, yes, we do live better and we do live differently, but we do it without fear. We do it without the hesitation of what will people think. Because that moment where we live with calm, gracious kindness in front of people, it is a reminder to ourselves and also to them of their destruction, but our salvation. And that salvation comes from our God, and that's where our confidence is. Because then he finishes in heading towards the end of this bit in 29. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ, you should not only believe in him. See, isn't that exciting? There are moments where I really do wish that Scripture finished in different places. Because that would be nice, that we've been granted with the capacity from Christ for his sake that we would know and believe in him, and that would be just phenomenal. But Paul doesn't do that, because Paul writes about his own life and his own experience of Christ, but also to suffer for Jesus' sake. And he then says, you're engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had and now hear that I still have. See, Paul was pursued in each town where he went. He was pursued by two sets of people. He was pursued by members of the church who didn't believe in the same way that he did. Paul preached a gospel that was backed up by the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15 that said, if you are a Gentile, hurrah, you can be a follower of Christ. You don't need the added weight of Jewish history and tradition and those kind of things. But people followed Paul around, and you can see it happening in the book of Acts. And they would come in after he had preached, and he picks it up in Galatians. And people would say, well, if you're going to be a proper Christian, you need to be like this. And being a proper Christian means you need to be circumcised, and you need to keep the law, and you need to do all the Jewish stuff and everything like that. And Paul's gospel was no. The church said no, but still people followed him around doing that. The second set of people that he had opposition from were people who were disrupted by the economy of the people coming to faith and being given freedom and liberty. The slave girl, the inciting incident that put Paul in prison. Being a follower of Christ meant you lived differently. You lived contrary to the culture that was around you. And those were the enemies he was in conflict with, and carried on being in conflict with the church. Being a follower of Christ means you disrupt the value of things, because you put Christ above everything, and being fruitful and in service to him becomes the thing that matters. You get yourself an education, you put it to the service of Christ. You get yourself a new house, you put it to the service of Christ. You get a new car, you put it to the service of Christ. See, it's not about not having nice things. It's about who they are servicing in culture and community. And that's constantly Paul's conflict. Conflict with people who need money, and conflict with people with bad theological ideas. And he continually pushes the Philippians and those whose churches he's been involved with in the New Testament to be for Christ, completely and totally. And it's not easy, and he knows he will suffer. You just need to flip to the back end of 2 Corinthians and you'll find a list of the things that, a short list of the stuff that happened to him. So this day, choose. Choose to put yourself to the service of Christ. Oh, by the way, if you're a parent and you have a child, you have to prepare yourself for the day where your child might choose to serve Christ in a place where you would not like them to go. I have a friend of mine who is at school. One of his daughters is working in a refugee camp in Greece. Would you do that with your child? Encourage them to follow Christ, pursue Christ, be the person that Christ has called them to be? Because they believe in him and they may suffer. Can you trust Christ with your child? Can you trust Christ with your future? Where might he lead you to? And he will do it for his glory, because that's the glory that matters. So, if you don't know what to choose, choose life, and choose life in Christ, because it is all that matters. Pursue Jesus with all the energy and vigor that you have, and stand firm. Because where you stand decides your future. How you stand decides how you will live. Make a choice. Make it today.